Dobrý deň, sledujete reláciu Portrét na teatri. Naším dnešným hosťom je veterán kanadskej žurnalistiky, charizmatický muž, ktorý 40 rokov pôsobil ako redaktor i šéf-redaktor v zahraničnom spravodajstve v kanadskej televízii CBC. Vraj najlepší kanadský novinár je na svete nielen vďaka svojim rodičom, ktorých stratil počas holokaustu, ale je aj jedným z detí, ktoré zachránil Sir Nicholas Winton, teda patrí to tzv. Nickyho rodiny. Hosťom relácie Portrét je Joe Schlessinger. Dobrý deň, vitajte.
Dobrý deň, dobrý deň.
Pán Schlessinger, neviem, ako sa máme rozprávať, či po anglicky alebo po slovensky, ale môžem prezradiť to, že ste prežili detstvo v Bratislave, aj keď ste sa narodili vo Viedni. A ja by som bola veľmi rada, keby ste mi povedali, že ktorý je ten najsilnejší moment, ktorý máte v pamäti ohľadne svojho detstva prežitého práve tu v Bratislave.
Pamatuju si, že som sa vrátil po 40-50 letech do Bratislavy a podíval som sa na to náměstí tam a řekl se mi, jo, ta socha Hvězdoslava, oni tam nebyla, ta byla tady u divadla. A lidi mi řekli, že jo, tu sochu jaksi vzdálili, protože tam byla parkoviště nebo něco takového. A tyhle detaily, tam byla na druhé straně, tam byl karton, na druhé straně tam byla kavárna, kde můj otec hrál šachy a můj bratr a já jsme šli s ním a dostali jsme čokoládu se šlehačkou, to si tak pamatuju. Už ta kavárna tam není, ta byla na prvním poschodí, ta kavárna je teď na přízemí, jo. A já si pamatuju na ten vlak. A ta věc byla, že my jsme byli v Bratislavě, jo. A ten vlak opustil Prahu. Ale protože my jsme byli ve slovenském štátu a nemohli jsme do protektorátu, tak my jsme nemohli do Prahy. My jsme přejeli Moravu a Čechy. Jo? A pak ten vlak se zastavil v první stanici v Hitlerovém Reichu. To bylo v Sudetách. Jo? A tak jsme tam čekali na ten vlak z Prahy. Jo? A ten vlak byl opožděn. A tak nějaký ten funkcionář staničním majstr nebo nám řekl, že nemůžeme zůstat na peronu, musíme jít dovnitř. Ale nemůžeme jít do čekárny, protože pro Židy ta čekárna nebyla přístupná. Tak nás odvedli do hajzlu.
Na toalety, áno.
A ten poslední, když jsem viděl moje otce naposledy, jsme strávili tu noc v té toaletě. A já si vždycky ještě pamatuju, protože to byl šmolný takový pisuár, jo? Ten, jak bych to řekl, smel.
Ano, pach.
Ten pach té toalety mě zůstal vždycky jaksi...
V nose máte tu emočnú väzbu na ten pach.
A pak ráno přijel ten vlak. A já jsem nevěděl, že to naposledy, že co uvidíme jeho otce. A on to jistě taky nemohl vědět, ale jistě, že si to musel myslet, že to je naposledy, co vidí své syny. A pro mě, já si pamatuju, mám děti, no já si pamatuju, když ty děti byly malí a já jsem se na ně podíval. A nějak jsem si chtěl představit, co ty rodiče těch dětí, moje rodiče, co si mysleli, co
zažívali?
V této době, že svoje děti jaksi posílají ven, že je nikdy snad nevidí. Ten pocit, to bylo nemožné si to představit, jo?
Aké sú vaše spomienky z Veľkej Británie, keď ste prišli do rodiny, ktorá sa o vás postarala? Boli ste spoločne so svojím bratom?
Ne, on byl s jedním strýcem, já jsem byl s jiným. A nejenom to, my jsme tam přijeli začátku července a pak vypukla válka 2 měsíce později. Jsme byli evakuováni někde z města, protože my jsme byli ve velkém městě, a do nějaké rodiny anglické. Jo? Pak jsem tam byl pár měsíců, pak mě pošli zase někam jinde. A pak mě zase pošli k strýcově tetě a pak se mě zbavili a poslali mě do té československé státní školy v Británii, kde byli jiní děti jako já, kteří, my jsme všichni, i ti, kteří měli rodiče v Anglii, ta velká věc byla, co se stane s tou válkou, kdy se vrátíme domů, jo? Co se stává s našimi rodičmi. Nic jsme o tom nevěděli. A ta celá věc pro mě byla, to je začátek mé kariéry žurnalistické, protože my jsme všichni sledovali ten vývoj té války. Jo?
Počúvali ste to, predpokladám, v rozhlase, v rádiu.
Český rozhlas z Británie a tak dále a BBC a tak dále. Já jsem stal 6 hodin ráno to dělat.
A vy už ste hlásili správy. Čo sa deje?
Co se děje. A pak si pamatuju, to bylo 6. června 1944, tak jsem to poslouchal, tam byly zprávy o bitvách v Pademanche, v tom kanálu a nějaký ty bombardmenty ve Francii. A tak jsem napsal poprvé. Zdá se, že druhá fronta začala. A nikdo to nevěřil. A pak v 10 hodin BBC porušila jejich program a měli ten, jak bych to řekl, ty novinky od nějakého amerického generála, který se jmenoval Eisenhower, že ta druhá fronta začala.
Už ste to takmer vedeli. No, tak to boli tie žurnalistické začiatky, ale kým ešte k ním dospieme, pokojne ináč môžeme prejsť do angličtiny, pretože už tieto veci sa budú týkať vášho profesionálneho.
Jo.
So before we turn into your career, I would like to ask you, what was the life after you came back from Great Britain?
That was it. I was put into, I had a guardian appointed, a man named Major Antonín Rakoš, and I stayed with them for a while, and not very long, because again, this business of wanting to know what's happening. It was the 1st of May 1946, and there were various manifestations. You know, I think the communists were in the Old Town Square in Prague, the Social Democrats were in, or maybe the National Socialists were on the Václavák, and the others were on Karlovy náměstí. And I walked from one to the other just to see how things were going. And the next morning when I got up, I couldn't step on my leg. I couldn't walk. At first they told me that I would never walk properly. Spent 2 years in hospitals. And when I came out, it was in 1948, and the communists had already taken over, and the whole country had changed.
And that's the time when you worked for AP as a translator?
Yes, I needed a job, you know, and what did I know? I mean, I knew, I spoke English, you know, I spoke Czech, I spoke Slovak at the time, I spoke German, and so they hired me as a translator, and then slowly I became a reporter for them, and that's what I did.
So you kept just getting closer and closer to the journalism job.
I know, yeah. I know.
And in 1948, it was when you decided to leave the country, so you
No,
decided
it
to
was
emigrate?
later than that, because 1948 when I came out, no, I decided I had to leave the country because after that the communists started clamping down on the AP, you know. And I remember checking into the Carlton in Bratislava one day, and the concierge whispering to me, "A man in a leather coat has been asking what you're doing here."
Oops.
And the man in the leather coat, of course, that meant the STB, Státní bezpečnost. And not only that, a few days later, this arrested one of the staffers in the Associated Press Bureau. So I got the idea, I better get out of here.
Oh, okay. Which is easy to say, but to say it honestly and openly, that was the second time when you became a refugee in your own country. The first time when you left because of the Nazis, and now because of the communists.
That's right.
At that time you were very young, so I suppose you had your ideals and you were courageous. But did you ever imagine?
Listen, young people aren't necessarily courageous.
They're
young
not.
people are foolhardy.
Okay.
You think you're going to live forever. Machine guns, forget machine guns. It'll be fine.
Okay, but you haven't decided to be a hero and stay here and to be in the front line of the war.
No, I didn't. Anyway.
Okay. So you decided to leave.
Yes.
And Canada, the place where you then left and you lived the rest of your life, was a choice of yours, or it just happened?
No. My younger brother was already in Canada because he got out. He got out as a war orphan.
And after coming to Canada, what kind of jobs you did for a living?
Well, when I came to Canada, I went all the way to Vancouver where my brother was, and contrary to the diagnosis, I could walk. Not only could I walk, I could work. I worked on construction jobs. I worked as a waiter. I worked as a seaman. And then the following year, I went to university. And again, I was going to study economics and do something. I had no idea of becoming a journalist, didn't think of it. Except that one day, I happened to wander into the university student newspaper and thought, hey, this is fun, It's not about serious news, it's about, next week there's a dance and so-and-so won the scholarship and this, that, and the other, the football team won or lost or something other, which was something different than news as far as I'm concerned. And before I knew it, I was the editor-in-chief of this newspaper. I had a job at the local newspaper, a night job as a police reporter, and I took a full course at university sort of thing. So I worked both on the student newspaper at night as a police reporter for the Vancouver Sun. And
you enjoyed it?
I enjoyed it, and of course I missed classes because, hey, I'm going to get up to go to an 8:30 philosophy class, come on. So, but I managed to fake it. It's okay, I sort of went through it. And as a matter of fact, I didn't even finish university because by that time I had a newspaper job, and who needs this piece of paper?
Okay, nobody needs the diploma.
Yeah, right.
I believe if somebody loves his job or her job full-hearted, with journalists, it's a kind of lifestyle. You have to be on a mission.
Yes, it is, yeah, but I mean, there's journalism, and the reason that Vancouver is beautiful. It's a beautiful city. There's a sea, there are mountains, everything, etc.
Yeah.
And as I keep on saying, if I'd been a dentist, I'd still be there. But in journalism, it was about forest fires, ship sinking, things like that didn't interest me. I was interested more in. So I went east. I went to Toronto, worked in Toronto for the Toronto Star for a couple of years, and then I went to Europe and worked for UPI for a year, and then I got a job at the Herald Tribune in Paris. And there I found a new life.
So what was your aha moment when you realized that, okay, this is the platform I would like to dance on?
By that time, before long I was news editor of the place, and then I was assistant managing editor, and then I met my wife, and she worked for the American Embassy in Paris, and we got along very well. And I should say that in Canada I got married, but my wife and I split up in London. I went to Paris, she stayed in London. And so I met this lady from the embassy, and we got on very well. And then we had a baby. The baby's here. But I couldn't get married because I was still not divorced. So when we had our wedding, there were basically 4 people, apart from us. There was a witness for her, a witness for me, and a babysitter for our baby Leia. That's what it took to get married.
So when did you start to cover real news, international news?
Well, at the Herald Tribune, one of the reasons they hired me, one of the reasons, it was an American newspaper, but I knew North American newspaper practices, and I also knew Europe. So I had an advantage.
It was a huge advantage, yeah.
And I guess it was a great job. There was only one thing wrong. Paris is great for lovers. It was not so great for raising two babies. When I went into newspapers in the 50s, the ambitious did not go into journalism. It was badly paid. And so they hired immigrants and dropouts, and they hired people like me because we were cheap. And that, of course, has changed. Journalism has a better reputation now. It pays more money, and
brings
people
fame
like
and money.
Yeah, that's right. People like being on air. They all want to be presenters. They don't want to be reporters, really. They want to be anchors, right? So it's a different kind of business, And newspapers are suffering. They're closing bureaus all over the place. So you always only get to the story after the story has started, and the stories that go uncovered, undiscovered, because nobody's around to report them.
But I need to read it because it's a lot that you covered. You've been in Russia with former US President Richard Nixon. In Vietnam, when the troops were on the ground. You've been there in St. Peter's Square when John Paul II became a pope, and many, many other occasions. I guess, but it's just my guessing, that you had to completely change your lifestyle, and you had to come to the point that you had to understand that news is first. Covering news is first in my life.
Well, it isn't so much that. It is, you see, my wife had a lot to do with it. She was in the diplomatic service. She had served in Colombo, in Ceylon, in Sri Lanka now. Mm-hmm. She served in Moscow when Gary Powers and the U2 were brought down, when Khrushchev and Nixon had the kitchen debate. She was there. So she was used to moving around. Mm-hmm. So that was it. By that time, she had given up her job and looked after the children, and moving around became part of our family life. Our children got used to it and started learning languages, various languages and things as they went along. They were born in Paris, then they lived in Toronto, then they lived in Hong Kong, then they lived in Paris again, then they lived in Washington. Mm-hmm. So my children grew up with this. And yes, I was on the road much of the time. So my wife really raised these children.
She was the backbone of the family.
She was a very good mother and a wonderful wife.
And I believe that you love to be in the job and on the job all the time.
Yeah, I mean, come on. They send you around the world to watch the universe unfold. And they pay you to do it.
That's a good job, isn't it? And if we talk about the job, if you judged recent journalism, when there are not so many reporters and correspondents in the field anymore.
I know.
So how do you see it? Did it influence basically the basic of the news, of the newscast as it's done in the world?
Of course it does.
In which way?
Because the original... Somewhere, always along the line, somebody has to cover the original news.
Somebody has to be there.
Yeah, it has to be there. It doesn't really matter. You can take, let's say, a city council, okay, has committees, etc. You have to have someone there. They may sit there and not have any news. Nothing may happen that day. But you have someone there when the news does happen. Well, now they go there after the news happens. It used to be, let me give you an example, okay? I was in Tehran, I think the Shah was still in power. Khomeini was still in exile, but there was kind of a contest between them. And we heard about an earthquake in eastern Iran. Well, I didn't get in touch with Toronto. I just I got together with a few colleagues and we chartered a plane together. We took out our credit cards and said here and flew there. And indeed in this town where the earthquake was, there was a conflict between the Shah's people and the Khomeini's people as to who could help these people most. And it was a great human story, it was a great political story, etc. Now, if it had happened now, I would have had to get in contact with
the editor,
Toronto.
Yeah.
They would have convoked a meeting to decide which program is going to put how many dollars into this story,
Yeah.
or whether they wanted and what they wanted. And by the time that they got around to doing it, it was probably the weekend, so they waited till Monday, the story would be over.
And I see it's you who is covering the story, and there is always a small piece of you in the story in a way. Can we extract your piece that you put into your stories, human stories you covered in the news? The way you judged the situation,
of course,
rules you played
my
by.
childhood plays a role in that. If I went to, I don't know, to Vietnam, let's say, and I saw refugees along the road, I know how they felt, right? If I saw people under bombardment, I remember being in Britain when the bombs fell, you know, as a child. So obviously I had more empathy for what was happening to these people, and that this empathy made itself felt. It wasn't that I'm, you know, that perceptive a writer, but I knew about these situations, so I was familiar with what was happening, which is why they kept me sending to these situations.
In that context, I would like to quote Nicholas Winton. He wrote in a letter in 1939 that there is a difference between passive and active good, and you know this quote because it's in the document as well. The last, in my opinion, means to dedicate time and energy to mitigate pain and suffering. It requires one actively seeks those that suffer and are in danger, not just to live an exemplary passive life without doing evil. So my question is, what is the best thing you did for others in that context?
Well, I didn't. I mean, I may have helped people here and there, but the point is, as far as I could see, my life was to bring the truth to people, to bring the suffering of others to the attention of people. This was my life, and I don't make any apologies for it. I wasn't active in any. As a matter of fact, in a sense, I wasn't politically active because I may have had my political opinions, but I learned to overcome them, my biases, etc.
Mr. Schlessinger, thank you very much for this interview.
You're welcome.
I wish you good health and happiness.
Well, thank you.
Šťastie, lásku a veľa zdravia.
A mám štěstí v lásce a zdraví taky jsem, i když se nepohýbám velmi dobře.
Ďakujeme veľmi pekne za rozhovor.
Tak to byl my pleasure.
Našim dnešným hostom v relácii Portrét bol Joe Schlessinger.
Wow.